Thank you for tuning in to NewSong Community Church's Child and Youth Protection Policy and Procedures Refresher Training. According to our policy and procedures, we are to do a regular training in youth protection policy and procedures. So hopefully once every 3 years now, we can make sure that all youth volunteers and workers get this refresher training. We're putting it online for your convenience. But there will also be a follow-up test. So after you finish watching the video, and then go ahead and take the test and turn that back into the church office so it can be signed and then put into the teacher file. The reason why we teach this and we do continual refresher training, and by the way, if you're a first-time teacher, you also need to fill out a youth workers application as well as take this youth policy training. No one at NewSong should be involved in any kind of youth work until they have taken the youth policy training and filled out a application to work so that we can do background checks and so forth. So that's all a part of our policy, which I have in my hand. And before signing your application to work for youth, either if you're a past teacher or volunteer worker, you've already done this, then you would have read our entire youth policy and procedures booklet. And so I would encourage you to go back and read it again as we go through this training online. The reason why we teach this on a regular basis and do a refresher on our child youth protection policy and procedures is number one, to protect our children. Every one of our children are very precious to us, and we want to protect them from any kind of abuse or danger of harm or in any way, shape, or form. The other is to protect our volunteers, our workers, our adults who will be working with children, because all it takes is an allegation, a false allegation, and people seem to be guilty until proven innocent. And so we want to make sure that that never happens. And then finally, to protect the church's liability so that we don't incur high insurance payments and settlements and things like that. So we want to protect the church's liability as well. In the child youth protection policy and procedures, there are several things that we'll be covering. We want to look at the definition of abuse, selection and screening of church staff and volunteers, supervision of children and youth, response by church workers to injuries and accidents, response by church workers to allegations of abuse, education of persons who work with children. Now, within our youth policy and procedures booklet, there are also several different types of forms and guidelines. There's the application to work and volunteer to work with youth or children. We have interviews with the workers, so there's an interview guideline. Also, there's a written record of contact with a reference of an applicant. So if you're wanting to work with youth in any way, any capacity, we like to do a background check on each person and to have that on file. We do check those references. We require 3 references to work with youth. There's also a single event and permission form. And then we also have a form for filling out children's medical background number, emergency numbers, and background information on each youth. If you're going to drive a car, there's a volunteer driver information sheet. And then there's also incident reports and report of suspected incident of youth abuse. So the youth policy covers all of those different areas. Now on page 3 of the youth protection policy, there's an introduction. We have a few scriptures. For one, Mark chapter 10, 13 through 16. I like this passage as it relates Jesus to kids. There it says, people were bringing little children to him in order that he might touch them, and the disciples spoke sternly to them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, let the children come to me, Do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly, I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a child will never enter it. And he took them up into his arms, laid his hands on them, and he blessed them. And so Jesus shows us the value that our children have, that intrinsic value in him. And so, anyhow, there's several things there in the introduction to look at the purpose that we have for having a guarded policy like this on working with kids. Page number 5 talks about the definition of child abuse, and it goes into a very technical definition of child abuse. Please be sure to read that. There will be some of those on the test in regards to different types of child abuse. It defines negligence, what that means. And then on the bottom of page 6 is the selection and screening of staff and volunteers, anyone who works with our youth. And I can just summarize it this way, that anyone who comes to NewSong and wants to work with youth, first of all, they need to go through a membership class. And once they have completed the membership class and they have committed to membership, then they meet with one of the pastors and fills out an application to work. And in that, there will also be at least 3 references that will be checked up on. And then there's also a history of work with kids or with youth in the past. Once that is done, there's a short interview, and then the person is approved or not approved. And so that will go into the file, but then there will also be, like we're doing here in this video, a periodic training on the youth policy so that people are constantly aware of how we're supposed to work with kids at NewSong. And so that's really important, that whole process of beginning to work with youth here at NewSong. And by the way, and there's on page 7 a very important statement. I put it in bold writing. The results of our interview, especially when sensitive areas have been discussed, shall be kept confidential. So you can rest assured that anything that we talk about in the interview and going through the application process will be held in the strictest of confidence. Now, page number 8 in your handout, it talks about supervision of children and youth. There will define who is an adult, who is not an adult. An adult is defined in our policy as a person of at least 18 years of age and at least 5 years older than those youth they're working with. So you could be 18, but it does not mean you're supervising and working with 17-year-olds. Okay, you can work with 13-year-olds, 5 years difference. So if you wanted to work with our high school youth, then the oldest could be, say, 18 or 19. You'd need to be 23, 24 years of age. So you need to be 18 or 5 years older than those who are being supervised. Supervision of classroom activities. Our policy says that we need to have, if it's all guys in there, then we need to have male supervision. If we have a mixture of guys and girls, then we need to have a mixture of volunteers in there. The biggest thing is a 2-person policy. A 2-person policy at all times. And they need to be in an open, if there's just one teacher in a room, there needs to be an open door where there's another teacher close by that can come and go and check on those students and those teachers. Open door policy is absolute at NewSong. There is no closed door, never. Never. I guess I should put an asterisk on that. There could be a closed door in doing counseling as long as there's 2 people present in that room when that door is closed. And if it's a female, then there's going to be at least one female in that room with that student. We also, in our policy, have a strict supervisor, adult worker to youth. And it should never exceed 1 worker per 10 youth. So if we end up having 20 youth, we need to have at least 2 workers in that, whatever it is that we're doing. Whether it's a Bible class or we're doing something as a project to rake leaves and help people. Attendance records are huge. So students that come to class, they need to sign in. We need to have attendance. What day is it? Who's the supervisor? And then we maintain the record of those for 3 years. 3 years attendance records. And again, in non-classroom activities, at least 2 adults will be present for all non-classroom activities involving children or youth. Always a 2-person policy within close proximity to whatever event's going on. And again, it needs to be a balance of men and women too, boys and girls that we're involved with. Youth counseling. In instances of youth counseling where circumstances dictate that counseling is most effective on a one-on-one basis, a church staff person or volunteer may meet individually with a child or youth with the awareness and previous consent of that parent or legal guardian. Exceptions to consent may be made for emergencies only. But we like to go above and beyond that, and there's no reason why we can't have, since we have a female pastor, male pastor, that we can have a mixture of both in the counseling situation. And again, trips and retreats and things that when we leave the facility, all these rules continue on. 2-person policy, making sure we have both genders there. In situations where we're staying like overnight in a hotel, of course all the girls will be with the 2 adults in that room, and all the guys will be there with 2 adults in that room. Again, 2-person policy in all overnight situations. And again, everything requires a permission slip. We need medical permission slips in case we have to go to an emergency room, that they have insurance cards, and we have permission slips so that we can treat the young people. Driving is a big issue. So who can drive youth and who cannot drive youth? Number 1, all youth workers are going to have to be on file as a licensed driver. If they're using their vehicle, we need to have the paperwork that their insurance is current. So bottom of page 9, in case you forget this, are some specific driver rules for church events. Let me break here for a second, because what constitutes a church event and what doesn't constitute a church event. And if it's something that we are transporting people, the church, if it's something that we have run in the bulletin, it's something that we need permission slips for. That would be considered a church event. Now there are sometimes, because people know each other in the church, they get several people and they go off to, say, Cedar Point or whatever. But we didn't promote it. We're not paying for it. And we're not recruiting drivers for that event. That's not a church event. But when it does fit those criteria, it becomes a church event, and we need to follow all the rules in the policy pertaining to a church event for youth. The driver must be known to the designated leader of the event. The driver must be 21 years old, not 18. Got to be at least 21. The driver must have a valid state's driver's license for the vehicle they're operating. For instance, it could be a bus. They would need a CDL. A driver has to have proof of insurance, and the driver must be accompanied by at least 2 children and youth and 1 other adult. Okay, so the driver must have read, signed, and acknowledged the form indicating that the policy has been read and will be followed, and there is a form for that that's available. Okay, what happens when, let's say, a youth gets injured? Then we do have a form, and we need to have that documented within 24 hours of the incident. So maybe we're out here playing basketball and a youth twists their ankle, and maybe they even have to have medical care. Make sure any kind of incident that took place as far as an injury, that form is filled out. It's Form D1, incident report. Anytime a youth is injured while doing any kind of church event. Now there is the response of workers, teachers, volunteers, if there are any allegations of abuse. Now this is quite extensive, and I'm just going to direct you to page 10 of the youth policy, and there's a lot of sensitivity when something like this happens. Sensitivity for the alleged victim, sensitivity for the alleged volunteer worker, and it needs to be handled properly. And in our policy, it's stated very clearly how to handle that step by step, and some things need to take place immediately. And then there's some follow-up in the case of abuse that needs to be taken place by specific professional people. Education of persons who are going to be working with youth, this is part of it. We also want to do more training. This will not be the last of the videos on training teachers, volunteers, and youth workers. We will be having more trainings. But this is one of the first, and the training is listed on page 11. And so just to summarize this refresher training, or if in the case of a person who's just now applying, the purpose of it is protect our children, protect our volunteers and our workers, and also to protect the liability of the church. Jesus loved the little children. We do too. And we want to make sure that this place is a safe place for our kids. Make sure that as you go through this video, you remember the definitions of abuse, what it takes to select and how we go about the screening process with potential youth workers. Supervision of the children is important, and that it's done properly. What constitutes an adult? They need to be 18 or 5 years older than those they're supervising. The two-person policy is always going on. If we get back from Cedar Point or a concert and we get back to the church building and you have a teenage girl who's waiting for her parents to come pick her up, you don't wait here alone if you're a guy. You need to wait here to for the pickup of that youth with a lady volunteer as well. Maybe it's your wife. You don't say, go ahead, go home, I'll give her a ride home. Never. That doesn't ever happen. So two-person policy, being always sensitive to the gender situation that you're involved in, so that the genders match between youth and adult, and two-person policy at all times. Responding to injuries, responding to allegations of abuse, the policy makes it very clear, and knowing that we will be doing continual education. So I look forward to you working with young people here at NewSong and doing it in a way in which these kids feel very, very safe, as well as the parents and any guests that might be joining NewSong, that they know we have a very clear-cut policy, that the safety of our children is extremely important to us, and that we're going to do everything to make this a very safe place. So God bless you for being willing to work with youth here at NewSong. Thank you very much.